with all the slides on it as well. There we go. Okay, well, welcome to the Diversity and Inclusion webinar series. Today we're going to be discussing how a shift to diversity in marketing affects your business and how to pivot naturally. Today we have TAURI Laws-PHILLIPS back with us to speak on this topic. TAURI is an Austin-based mother, comedienne, and brand marketer. She has over 10 years experience as an improviser and corporate facilitator. She practices the basic tenets of improv throughout her professional career with building cohesive teams, innovative ideation, and precision execution. She's actually developed diversity and inclusion training for companies in multiple verticals with a focus on unconscious bias. TAURI is currently a mentor for SKU Brand Accelerator and Contractor, building several small brands, formerly the Vice President of Marketing for American English Haircare, and has worked to build and market brands for Unilever and Southwest Media Group. So we are super excited to have you here today, TAURI, and let me get this over to you. And you can
awesome.
Here.
Thank you so much. Okay. How exciting. I didn't even know I could control them. Good morning to everyone there in Yountville. My name is TAURI Laws-PHILLIPS, and I am super excited to be doing this with you today. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. It's something that I have worked quite a bit to change and challenge within businesses. It's something that I'm actively working with a number of companies on and have worked a lot with in the luxury set of a number of verticals. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Please know that I strive for it to be a warm and welcoming space. That's why I always mention that I'm a comedian and an improviser, because I like to shift on my feet. But for me, it's really most important that you have an open heart and an open mind in order to accept new information, because these are topics that can be very heavy and that can be very difficult to talk about. There's a lot of emotions swirling around them. There's lots of emotions in the air, in the climate of the world today. So feel free to ask me all of those questions and know that I'm really happy to answer them. I think we're going to take questions at the end though, so jot them down as you're thinking. Is that correct, Elizabeth? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Well, let's get started. Diversity is going to affect you. Let's see, am I able to change it? Is it working for me? Is it changing for you guys? It's not changing for me. Sorry. Let's see. There we go. I did it. Sorry. I'm on board. Okay, so Elizabeth was kind enough to introduce me. I've been doing this for quite a long time. That's all this really says. Everything she said and more. So a little bit about what we'll talk about today. We'll cover a brief overview about diversity and kind of go over some of the terms. Then we'll talk about the impact of diversity on tourism and your businesses, and then what those cost-effective ways are to be inclusive, how you can do this really easily, and then inviting new markets into your business. That's the one. Okay, so diversity it used to be talked about in a way where people would say, oh, we're colorblind. Well, now we've swung into a place where the world is about recognizing differences, celebrating them, and how we can all work together. When you think about diversity, there's a couple of different buckets you could sort of put diversity into. Race and religion, and that is all the different ways that we experience spirituality, but also all the different ways that we may look. So think of that way. Gender and age, I put those together because I also like to add in gender neutral is one of those ways that you can recognize diversity that may be new to a lot of people. So there's gender neutral, there's also male and female, there's transgender, and then with age diversity, that's recognizing diversity in both the young and old, and diversifying your, this is looking both internally and externally at your markets as well as your employees, as really diversifying the types of people around you. With sexuality, I always like to give you a chance to understand the LGBTQIA. We have new letters involved, and that's lesbian, gay, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual. And then differently abled and size inclusive. This is one of those things that definitely gets left out of imagery, but this is something to be really thoughtful of. And that's being inclusive and thoughtful of those with different abilities. So we're no longer really using terms like disabled and really thinking of them as differently abled. And size inclusivity. You may have heard of Lizzo. She is a plus size singer, and she is really helping to drive this to the front. So it's recognizing beauty exists in all ways, and doing that with imagery that reflects the people around us. So these are the different ways you can really start to check your biases and be aware that all of these people want to be included. Sometimes there's questions about that one, so go on and jot it down. I'll come back to it later. So, what's the impact of diversity on tourism? Okay, so history has a long memory. Let's go over how we got here. Green books. This is something that you may or may not have an understanding of, but in recent American history, green books existed to inform African Americans of safe places to travel and safe places to receive services. This was because, especially in the South, there were places where African Americans weren't safe and weren't comfortable and really genuinely could not receive services. And so green books existed to give them a safe map, a roadmap of places where they could eat, stay, and receive gasoline, basic necessities. There's also a really great movie about it, so you can enjoy it and learn about it all at the same time. Travel safety fears. This one is something that people may not recognize, is that people of diverse backgrounds regularly research whether a destination is safe for them or it has a history of racist incidents. So keep this in mind. People are wondering if they're going to be safe where they're going. I myself have done this, checking to see if parts of the country and other countries are safe for me to be and whether I can feel safe in those places. And also bad press. People are gonna look for things. So this is another great place to write down your questions. But people are looking for those things, and they're often going to find the old bad PR, the bad reviews, and travel warnings. Groups like the NAACP often are issuing travel warnings for groups of people. And there are a number of organizations that will issue travel warnings. Even our government will issue travel warnings for subgroups of our population. So you may see them for other countries on whether women should be traveling alone or those sorts of things in places, and those sorts of things live forever on the internet. So after saying that, I'll tell you to take a moment and just be aware of what those things are for your business. So it's time to do inventory. Look up those reviews and see what they really reveal. This is why I say take a moment, because it's really easy to read a bad review and go, nope, we would never do that. Well, that's because you take pride in your business and what you've created is yours and you created it. But sometimes there's a nugget of truth in what's happening. And surely if there's a history of multiple reviews and things saying negative incidents or those sorts of things, then there might be a pattern of truthful things that are happening. So better to be ready and have a plan. So yes, be better about it, but have a plan for the worst. If something bad happens, how are you going to respond if a bad review or experience happens? My suggestion is to be swift, be honest, and be better. Learning is never ending. So learning isn't a destination, it's the journey of life. So make issues a priority, be honest with yourself and your team, and plan on being better. So what do you do when you get bad press or a bad review? So the biggest thing I can say is that what you think you might do might be different than what the current cultural expectations are. We're in a place where we have a very strong cancel culture. I'm not going to give you my stump speech on what I think about that. Well, I mean, if you ask, I probably will at the end, but I want to make sure we get to the end. The cancel culture is oftentimes looking for a head on a stick. Well, that's not always necessarily the way you want to treat people internally if something's happened. But understanding that you're going to need to be swift, you're going to need to be very honest externally and be very polite internally and externally. So always have someone high in your organization responding. It should be managers, it should be owners that are responding. Take responsibility for the incident, but not necessarily. That's why I say be polite, but nobody's saying you have to apologize. That's why you oftentimes hear we're taking a moment to review what has happened. These are notes from my PR background, PS. And offer replacements and discounts with apologies if you're issuing apologies, and personalize those responses. I'm sure we'll get some questions about things like Yelp coming up a little later. If you are responding to those, don't make it a canned response, personalize those responses so that we can make sure what we're saying is very specific to what happened. So the numbers don't lie. Diversity is happening, and it's happening in businesses like yours. 17% of African Americans take one or more international trips and travel locally more than 6 times per year, according to a Mandela research firm report in 2017. That means it's probably even more now, because it's been a couple of while. Okay, I'm saying now, but you know, considering COVID this year. And Hispanics are strong consumers that account for over 56 billion in the travel industry every year. That's leisure travel, not even the business travel, according to the National Tour Association. And millennials, even them, I heard someone groan over the internet, and that's funny because I think you're all muted, but millennials are even making travel a priority. They plan to spend $4,400 of travel in 2019 each. I know, I heard the second groan. Okay, so I'm sure you have questions because we covered a few things there that are hot topics. Those are things we definitely have to pay attention to. Check in with your feelings because we mentioned some of the bad things. Be aware of those feelings, but write down your questions and take a deep breath. And let's keep going. And I will say here, I did the research. I did the research as if I were traveling without sort of any thought of what I know, thanks to having a wonderful friend like Elizabeth, about your area of the country. And I too, so I did the research. I had the that memory of a story a couple of years ago of women and a train. And so I wanted to dig in deep and understand what else other people like me would be finding when they were looking to plan a trip. So I did the research, I understand what they may see, and let's talk about how we can help them not see it. So there's really cost-effective ways to be inclusive and invite people and welcome them to your business. And that's good because budgets are tight. It's 2020, it's COVID, it's tight. I know. So we can use this time to pivot our businesses to be poised when travel rebounds fully. So here are a few things that I think that you could have that are all cost-effective ways to have an inclusivity strategy. Training is super incredibly important. I'm sure that each of your businesses are training your employees on all of the dimensions of a beautiful wine. I'm sure that for restaurants, you're training. I remember my restaurant days and having to know every ingredient in a dish or a meal and having to understand how that would pair with different wines or beers or so on. So you're doing the training in lots of those areas, and you're teaching your people how to treat the people that they're interacting with. Be explicit about your diversity goals. Add diversity and language around that to your employee training. If your goal is to have everyone leave feeling like they had a wonderful meal, be explicit about it, because if diversity is important to you, it might not be something that has been on the forefront of the minds of the people who are interacting with your customers. And so let's put this on their mind, and let's help them to understand that they can't make assumptions or judgments about people, because that's oftentimes where those things start to come in. So be very explicit about those things. You know, we used to be in a place, when I said that we used to be in a place where everyone was colorblind. We used to be in a place where people didn't feel comfortable writing ethnicities into a training manual, because, you know, we were all afraid. It was always kind of like, you know, legally we can't, we're not going to mention race because we're afraid it'll get us in trouble. Well, what got us in trouble was not mentioning it. So I say be explicit in letting them know. Let's be sure we treat everyone who may look differently according to all of those different ways you can be diverse, and be really explicit about that. That's probably the cheapest thing on this list. Social media, the cheapest way to do it is, if you're already engaging in social media, simply diversify your imagery. Make sure your imagery includes people who look differently, who have different sizes, who are different ages. Include all of that, because it simply makes people feel welcomed, and it makes them know that you care about them being included. For those that are doing content creation, if you have a budget where you are doing PR, or you're doing videos, you're working with influencers, I hear another groan, or you're having blogs created for you, create content around how other groups are interacting with your business. So if you're having tour groups from different countries or from different parts of the country, include some information on the experience that they had. With that, I would also say, when you have diverse guests, ask them for reviews. Take great care of them, do the great job that you do always, but shake a hand, ask them how they enjoyed things. Let them know that diversity is a goal for you, and ask them to write a review. I would love nothing more than for someone to acknowledge me and to say, you know what, I'm so happy that you came in. We don't have, especially considering we covered in the last webinar, there isn't a lot of Black people in Yountville. So if I show up and come to dinner, someone come shake my hand and ask me for a review. I will write you a glistening 5-star review and be happy to do it. And honestly, to hear that someone cares enough, simply stating, you know, I sat in on a really great webinar. Don't forget to add my name in there. I sat in on a great webinar, and we were thinking about different ways to, you know, increase our diversity. Would you mind writing us a review? Have you had a great time today? I can't imagine anyone not wanting to really help out. So word of mouth is free. So in those training sessions, there's a few ways you can approach training. There is the unconscious bias training for your full staff, which, believe me, would be a wonderful idea. I did plug at the top that I offer those, but they are expensive. But if you have the budget to do it, I absolutely suggest you do it. If you're not able to do it, doing one for your management team is a great way to have everyone on board. But honestly, simply updating your service standards to include that language is low cost, and honestly, it's the most important. Include making eye contact with people, removing assumptions and judgment, and avoid the potholes. When I say making eye contact with people, I will tell you that people of diverse backgrounds, there's one constant thing that we all share, and it is instances of having people not acknowledge you in service situations. And that is the kind of thing that can really make people feel different and feel called out and feel less than. So simply including eye contact, focused eye contact, for a second and looking at someone in the eyes and smiling at them helps people really feel connected. It also lessens our ability to judge people when we acknowledge their humanity. So that's something I include in every training manual that I help rewrite. And it's something that I really suggest that you make top of mind. It's sort of the thing when you walk into a store and someone looks at you and says, "Hey, how are you? Welcome into the Gap," as opposed to, "Hey, how are you? Welcome to the Gap. Do you need anything?" You just don't feel acknowledged when you see the side of the head. So keep that one on your list. Content creation. So again, that groan about influencers. I know not everybody loves them, but it's true. They do a really great job of driving traffic, especially when it is about travel, and especially with Gen Xers, millennials, and Gen Z. So that group of people is oftentimes researching how the places that they want to travel in two different groups. This starts to bleed into a little bit of my Pinterest talk as well. We have aspirational travel, which I definitely would put your area of the country into that idea of aspirational travel. It's somewhere that people say they always wanted to go, and it has a very special place. I think a lot of people travel to your area of the country for special reasons and to celebrate special events. So it's very aspirational, but also this group of people is also very active planners. So through influencers, you can kind of catch people who put your area, Yountville and Napa and wine country, high on their list, and it's there until they move it into active planning. With a tool like Pinterest, you can catch those people in both areas. And I will tell you, with 175 million users, almost 25% of those people are actively looking through travel. So you can hit them in both areas. It's also pretty inexpensive, I mean free, to create content for Pinterest. So if you're creating content in other places, you can make sure you are extending that reach by putting it on Pinterest, because it will live there for a long time and continue to gain traffic for 6 to 12 to 18 months after. So that's really important. And then with blogs, good press, and your website. So if you have a PR group that you are working with or a PR person, and you have a content strategy, oftentimes that content strategy is built out of wanting to boost your SEO or your website's rank. Not to mention, it can help kind of push down any negative information that exists of your business on the internet. But I'll tell you, if you are looking to improve your ranks with groups that are from other countries or multilingual, then recreating that same content in those languages for your website so that it ranks in those other languages is brilliantly smart. And another very inexpensive way to use that. Have those dollars really work well for you. Be specific about your approach to diversity on your Us page. That's really, your About Us page is, when people are coming for the first time, that's the time they're looking at your About Us. So including something about being specific about wanting to increase diversity, or including any association memberships or compliances or available accommodations. So when I talk about differently abled people, if your location is able to create accommodations, especially when we're talking about areas that typically have been more difficult, because say if you're doing tours, it can be particularly difficult for someone who is in a wheelchair or uses something else that helps them to move. If you have a way that helps that, then include that accommodation on your website. If you are members of associations, if there are female travel associations, those sorts of things, include those, include that information on your About Us, because people will love it, and it's a great way to let people know why it's important to you, a blog on why that's important to you, will rank high and let people know that you're really welcoming them. So, inviting new markets. Well, let's identify who you want to invite, and then let's figure out who those groups are, and then let's connect with those new targets. So, decide who your goal is, because it's very hard to have diversity across everybody. I mean, yes, it is definitely the goal, but we did also talk about budgets. So there may be ways that you can spend wisely or use those very cost-effective ways to sort of welcome people without having to spend a lot on those places. So with things like gender and age, as well as race and religion, your imagery is the first easiest way to be super welcoming. With sexuality, that's the LGBTQIA. That may involve a little more active outreach, as well as race, pulling people in. And then differently abled and size inclusivity. Size, of course, easier to work with imagery, but is it a thing of having accommodations and then getting those certifications? So those are some of the goals, is figuring out who, and then finding where those intersections are. So can we invite groups in and sort of hit two birds with one stone? Mommy groups are a great way to do that. It's a great way to reach out to groups of women. One, you're getting women. Oftentimes you're going to get women of multiple different backgrounds, and you can hit your age inclusivity there, so that's great. Business associations is another one. There are diverse business associations for almost every single group of businesses you could ever think of. There are associations for Hispanic and Latinx doctors. There are associations for Black accountants. There's associations for women in tech, for Asian women in tech, and all of those different associations. Those are all great opportunities to connect with those groups that intersect at multiple of these groups and invite them in. Sometimes it's simply offering opportunities for them to visit you. Sometimes it may be a content opportunity. So if you're gonna be really smart, me, who has been a scrappy marketer, who even when I worked at Unilever, I never had Dove budgets. Dove gets all the money, everybody else didn't get the money, so I had to be scrappy. And I will tell you, I always looked for opportunities to extend those dollars as far as possible. So if you connect with the Black Women in Tech Association, then I suggest you take some pictures, make sure that you ask someone there if they'll write a blog, and make sure those pictures go on your social media. Extend all of it as far as possible. Use those dollars wisely. Now, with travel and wine, there's a group for every intersection, every single one. I looked for hours. There's a ton of them. So there are lots of these groups that you can reach out to connect with them and let them know that diversity is a goal for you, and ask them how you can be involved into their group. A number of the ones that I looked at that I really enjoyed were the Travels Ghoulie, Travel Noir, Queer in the World, and Nomadness TV. So look up all of these and enjoy, because there's lots of great opportunities. So, whoo, I must have been talking fast. We hit questions fast. Let's see. I, on my end, Elizabeth, cannot see the chat. Okay.
Okay, just wanted to unmute myself. There we go. And then we can go here to this, oops, sorry.
Oh, I see one.
Let's go to chat. All right, very good.
Stephanie, avoiding the potholes. Absolutely. I got examples for days, Stephanie. When I say avoid the potholes, I really mean avoiding microaggressions. So those are the things. A microaggression is an act that can seem benign on the surface, but that calls out people's differences. So a pothole, an example of a pothole would be the surprise at my understanding about wine. And that doesn't explicitly say, oh, you're Black and you're a woman and you're from Texas. Why do you know anything about wine? But it's the, oh, you know about wine? So those little snipes that can make people feel bad. Another example, well, I'll tell you, I read an article, Elizabeth and I talked about this. There's a blog that I found while researching your area about a young lady who, an African-American woman who moved to your area to work in wine. And she had a long list of things that people had said. Those things that just call out differences and those uncomfortable feelings. Another pothole I would say is recognizing people's differences and slighting them for that. So the surprise that a younger group acted so well, or the compliments that are thinly veiled jabs, that you might not even recognize it. But that's where it takes a step back and understanding what these potholes are and how those things could make other people feel. I hope that was a good explanation. How do you avoid tokenism? Sometimes it feels as if some businesses are adding in biopics, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, to check the box. And how can it be done authentically? Is it being upfront about intentions? So I think one thing that I would say is that the goal is never, tokenism often happens when we sort of think that it's one and done. I've had these conversations a lot lately. Well, most of our staff is white, but we do have a gay man, so we're diverse. And I'm like, well, he doesn't get to speak for men of other diverse backgrounds. He doesn't get to speak for women of lots of diverse backgrounds, those sorts of things. So recognize that diversity is an ongoing goal. Can avoid tokenism. The other thing I would say is not making it the job of a person who is diverse to do the work. This is an incredibly important one. So being the Black person in an office, I hated the idea that it was my job to plan Black History Month. And so I typically would be like, I will help, but I will not take it on. Because that to me felt like I had become a token. And so oftentimes I would have to go back and talk about why I wasn't the one that needed to learn Black history, because I've been learning it my entire life. My grandmother was a teacher, so at Harriet Tubman Elementary, so believe me, I've been learning. But could everyone take it on themselves, upon themselves, to bring in other books that they could read that weren't Maya Angelou's I Know When a Caged Bird Sings? Like, could we reach a little bit deeper? Those sorts of things. The other thing I would say about not checking the box is really to do the internal work. So one thing about authenticity is it genuinely has to exist inside you or within you. And so if diversity is something that you need to do because everyone else said you need to, then you probably need to take a moment and think about how you should feel about diversity. One, I'm probably not talking to you because you're probably not on this call, so tell your friend that doesn't care, but take a moment to really connect with what your personal feelings are about diversity, and then how you can really do the work for that diversity to be internal and then reflected through your actions. So yes, I think it's important to be explicit and upfront about those intentions, but that'll come from a more diverse place. Okay, Carrie, Napa Valley marketing focus is luxury. Ooh, thank you for putting that in caps, Carrie. What is the perception and perspective of luxury by persons of color? How transparent, how is a transparent connection made? So I will tell you this, Carrie. Outside of, this comes from both my personal experience and professional experience, areas of the country that have an older, long-standing Black community typically have middle class and upper middle class luxury or luxury minded consumers. So they usually have a community that has a longer standing connection to luxury. And so outside of those areas, there can be a disconnect of cultures and socioeconomic status. And so therefore, this is a long-winded answer, sorry, Carrie. Therefore, oftentimes there is an unconscious bias that people of color are directly connected to a specific socioeconomic status. For instance, my personal example is that when I moved out of Atlanta, a city that was 35% African American and has a very large and very old, historically Black middle class community, and moved to Texas, which outside of Houston does not have any cities that are over, I believe Dallas was 18% African American when I lived there. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, and has a very segregated African American middle class. So the idea of African Americans connected with upper middle class living and lifestyles or luxury lifestyles simply didn't exist because most people weren't seeing that as their day-to-day. And so I personally had to really force people to move beyond perceptions of me when shopping, when dining, shopping, give me a break. But shopping for cars and things of that nature, I've really had so many instances where I've had issues and not getting help. And I can tell you, I've personally driven up to a dealership. I drove up in an Audi and then couldn't get anybody to sell me another Audi. And I was like, hello, genius. I've already got a lease. I just want a new lease. So internally, there can be a level of fear going into situations for African Americans. I can speak specifically for African Americans, but I can also tell you for, through the research that I've done for people in the Latinx community outside of the South, Southwest, and outside of Latin America, they oftentimes run into this as well, where they are feeling that disconnect of, do they have to whitewash themselves to be seen as applicable within luxury markets? So all of this is to say, Carrie, if you treat someone with their most luxurious experience within your business, then they won't have any qualms, but they also will very likely, that'll increase your word of mouth for that group. And also, I think one, there's incredible transparency. It's very, that welcomingness goes so far, so fast, but it's okay to be transparent. It's okay to say, you know what? We haven't had you before. What stopped you in the past and what's it going to take to get you back? We'd love for you to come back. We'd love for you to bring your friends. So I hope that was helpful. The next one from Stephanie, how can we celebrate and recognize diversity that is not immediately visible? Sexuality, non-neurotypical individuals, religious practices, etc., without making an uncomfortable focus. In other words, how do we celebrate them without outing them? So this is when I really talk about imagery can do a lot of that celebration. You know, if I having, we're now in a place where you might see a commercial with two moms in it, or two dads in it. And it's, I always chuckle and I always get really excited. Personally. And that's one of those ways where like just that imagery, nobody has to say it. You know, it's very obvious. And just that imagery is very welcoming. So things like that could be it. If you are walking up to, in a restaurant setting, if you're walking up to a table and it's very obvious that it is two people of the same gender having a meal that is particularly romantic, letting them know like it's wonderful to see you guys in love. Doesn't say. You could say the same thing that you would say to, you know, a heteronormative cis couple. I'm throwing out extra terms here. Y'all let me know if you want some definitions. But you could say the same thing without having to be explicit about that, and not having to out them. It is simply sometimes complimenting the things that make us different in a genuine way without putting focus on it. Are the ways that you could simply do that. So, you know, you might not want to bring up someone's religious practices if you don't know them well. I get that. But it is okay to make eye contact and ask someone if they need help, or say, you know, you look like you're doing good, but I want to ask, do you need a hand? They'll let you know, or they'll let you know if they don't want it. But you don't have to necessarily focus on it. I hope that's helpful, Stephanie. We absolutely can celebrate a lot of those things without outing them. Oh, good. It is. I did it right.
Good. I don't see any other questions, but I did want to go back a little bit to earlier in the presentation about the cancel culture. Could you dive a little bit more into that?
Absolutely. There is, I think a lot about our culture, the way that I think of pendulums. And I think that right now our pendulum is swung to a place where nobody could really ever imagine it being, in that there's always sort of this feeling that if a mistake is made, there's that want for a head-on mistake. There's always that like, can we get them fired? Can we get them ruined? Can we take all their money? You know, I get scared every time somebody says, eat the rich. I'm like, it's just a nice car. I'm not that wealthy. You know, I think that exists because there are so many feelings and emotions around differences right now. And sometimes that is differences of wealth. And I think that you have to choose what works best for your business. But I think if you are swift, I think if you are authentic, I think if you can look to repair relationships with communities, I think all the ways that you can show that you're truly doing the work, you can skirt having to be canceled or cancel anyone, but really doing the work to change. And that also is to say, that's why I think training is so incredibly important, because oftentimes your first line of interaction with the public is not often you, the person who owns a business or who built a business, or management. It oftentimes is someone who is paid significantly less and may not have the same feelings for your business as you do, and is much more likely to make those left-handed comments, or you know, make a right turn in the wrong direction and go on a bad tangent. And that training can do so much. The other thing is that training also brings them closer to the company. It also helps to communicate with them what your brand and values really are, so that they know what it is that they have to communicate. So cancel culture is something that I'm really tired of because I don't think it gives us the opportunity to grow. There is, I do agree with ensuring that everyone is, you know, punishment comes down, but I'm not always I'll leave it, you know, I'll let God have my vengeance. But I do think that we can respond and take actions that allow us to not have to be canceled.
Yeah, that was very well said. Thank you for that. Yeah, training is super important for sure, bringing that down into every person that represents your company, right? Essentially, everyone represents your company.
Kate Carter was nice enough to provide the link for the article that the article from VinePair that I referred to. That's one where I would say, take a deep breath as you read it. I'm choosing my words. I'm choosing my words very specifically because a lot of the incidents that this young lady has gone through, I've gone through very, very similar incidences in my life, traveling in this country and outside of this country, and in working situations and all of those things. What I want you to recognize is that intention exists. So did the person who said these things intend to make her feel bad? Most likely not. Though in some cases, probably. Does that necessarily remove how her feelings were injured? Also, most likely not. So the goal is how can we align what our unconscious biases are, so the things that we don't even recognize that we think, how can we bring those to the forefront so that we can remove those from how we interact? Because if those interactions are happening with people that we work with, what are the interactions that are happening with people that are guests in our businesses? And so that's where I really go back to, that's where it is about training, and it is about having some conversations, and it is about saying, like, you know, this happened to somebody in our area. And so how can we make sure this doesn't happen again? And to me, that's the big takeaway, is to really find some importance to that and realize that there is that kernel of truth. There's two sides, but the middle's probably where the truth lies. Great. If anyone has questions, feel free to pass them along. I'm happy to chat.
Thank you, Tauri. Yes, so this session's been recorded, so we will share that on our website and to the attendees as well, with the slides and Tauri's information. Also, just wanted to mention that next week we have two virtual meetings or virtual opportunities to connect. We have our all-member meeting on Wednesday with Congressman Mike Thompson. And then Thursday, Tauri will be back again for another presentation on our diversity and inclusion webinar series. So really excited about that. And if you have any other questions, like I said, you know, you can always send them to Tauri, send them to me, and I'm happy to facilitate as well. So thank you so much for your time today. Enjoy your vacation that you are on. Or I guess I've heard when you're on a vacation with your kids, it's really just a trip.
Yeah, no.